Thank you very much. Fellow panelists and distinguished audience. It's really heartening to see some very familiar faces, particularly those who are right now handling the policy. Mr. Sudhir is here, Food Secretary. It's one of the major jobs that he has to do. Siraji is here also, will be talking certain things, and I'll welcome if they can effectively participate in terms of what the government thinking is how to control the prices. I need not say anything why controlling food inflation is critical in this country, which has the largest mass of poverty and malnutrition in the world. So that is taken granted that this is a critical thing to control. Anything beyond 10% can create not only economic problems but also social and political problems. What I'm going to focus is on three things. Food inflation, what has been the nature and structure of food inflation in India, and I'm going to look at not just today, what is happening to onions or potatoes or tomatoes, but in a somewhat medium to long-term perspective what has happened. And then we will come to the critical question, and that's where the real meat of the presentation would be diagnostics. What is causing somewhat different scenario in the last 3, 4, 5 years than has been the case in earlier years? So what has gone wrong? Where have we gone wrong in policy? And out of that will come what the prescription or what policymakers can hopefully do. Let's try to see this. The inflation, if you look at from 95, 96 onwards, and 3 periods if you try to divide, politically, we had this NDA period. It's interesting to see that food inflation was below the WPI overall inflation in the country. Again, even in UPA 1, food inflation was a little below the overall inflation in the country. But what has happened here, it's not only 4.1 and 5.9, we can simply say 4 and 6, and then it has jumped to 10.3, but it is much higher than the overall inflation. So that means this is pulling the overall inflation also. So this distinction of the UPA 2 period must be kept in mind. Now within food inflation, technically we must understand what is food inflation. Food inflation has 2 major components. One is called the food articles and one is called the food products. Products are more like processed part of food and articles are more like the fresh and the raw part of the food. And what you can see, because this will have implications when I come to policy, you would see that the processed part always has shown somewhat lower rate of inflation than the food articles, which have been growing much, much faster. So if overall food inflation here was 10.3%, the food articles inflation is 12.2% and food products is only 7%. So this will have implications in terms of policy. Now there is a new thing that newspapers have been lately writing about, and that's the CPI concept. Country is more or less in a transition, changing from the WPI story to the CPI story, Consumer Price Index. But that is more recent. From 2011 they have worked out. Earlier we had this for the agriculture labor and industrial labor separate, but now the weights and all that. What I want to highlight here is that the food in the last 3 years average, if you say, the WPI was showing 8.7, last 3 years only, and CPI is 11.5. That means the consumer, from his angle or her angle, when you look at inflation, it is even more pinching than the wholesale story that we look at. And this is largely coming from fruits or this oil, those types of things. The weights of the 2 series are very different. And if you see the weights of food in overall WPI of all commodities,